thanks for coming out to see me. Thanks for staying. My name is Nick Caldwell, and I'm going to tell you about Reddit. A lot of Reddit fans in here, maybe? Yes. That helps my self-esteem so much. I used to work on business intelligence software. Raise your hand. What? So my topic is triple the team size without losing control. I'm going to tell you a little bit myself first. So I'm currently the VP of Engineering at Reddit, and I formerly am the general manager of a product family called Power BI at Microsoft. I was there for 13 years, and I grew a small team of about 10 people up to about a 300-person organization with 5 different products. Graduate of MIT, go Beavers, yes. And MBA at Berkeley Haas, go Bears. Oh. So that's a little bit about me, and I want to tell you about Reddit. So for those of you who don't know much about Reddit, or actually for those of you who are on Reddit, you may not know a few of these things. So quick stats. Reddit is the 4th largest site in the United States according to Alexa ranking. It has 325 million monthly active users. A lot of cool stuff is happening at Reddit. For those of you who are Redditors, maybe you've seen a lot of different product announcements. I'm going to tell you about what we've been doing this year later in the presentation. But just to summarize what's new, we've got a new exec team, cares a lot about making the platform more welcoming, and we care about monetization as well. So a very, very different product vision. And then the key thing that's important is rapid expansion. So that chart on the right is the number of employees at Reddit. Well, actually, this is out of date. So this is a quarter out of date. Reddit, has grown from about 30 engineers when I arrived to currently about 120. So let's talk about why tripling the team size without losing control is important. So a couple years back, there was a report called the Startup Genome Report, and it surveyed about 1,000 different startups and looked at the successful ones, looked at the ones that failed, and asked them what worked and what didn't work. This is an interesting stat that I care a lot about. It says within 3 years, 92% of startups fail, and of those, 43% fail due to issues with scale. Right? So as someone who wants my Reddit stock to someday be worth something, this is a very, very important statistic for me. And a big part of the reason why they brought me to Reddit was because of my past experience at Microsoft scaling a lot of different entrepreneurial teams. So with that in mind, let's talk about my first week at Reddit and the challenges I had there. So again, I'm coming from a big, gigantic company, Microsoft, coming down to a smaller organization. So my first day, this is what I see. I see a 30-person stand-up. There's a Google slide that we're using to track the work across the entire company. I'll show you that a little bit later. There's these people floating around called tech leads, but I can't find anyone who's like an actual manager. And then things are going really slow. Like we're a startup, we're not shipping stuff. Stuff's not going out the door. So given all that, we still had a ton of work to do. I think any of you guys who have seen Reddit would probably agree that it needs a little bit of a refresher. And we need to get that done. And then I also was asked to scale up the team. So I had to hire about 100 people. So this was kind of the jungle that I was dropped into. And I needed to figure out, how am I going to find managers? How am I going to give them roles and responsibilities so they even know what to do? What is the process we're going to use? And then how are we going to get all this stuff that we need to ship done? Like how are we going to move quickly? So that's what this talk is going to be about. There was tons of other challenges that I needed to hit, but those are the ones that I think you guys would be most interested in. So first one, how do you find managers? First problem I had is I had these folks calling themselves tech leads. And I remember when I started my engineering career like 15 years ago to my manager, and I asked him, what's a tech lead? And I asked, what is a tech lead? And he looked at me thoughtfully and he said, I have no idea. And but now, 15 years later, I'm an executive. I'm a bona fide executive. I'm an actual executive. 15 years of experience, and one of my ICs came to me and asked me, what's a tech lead? And I told him, I have no idea. I don't think anybody knows what a tech lead is. The best I can think of is like they're maybe proto-managers. That's for the purposes of this discussion. This isn't a philosophical discussion. This is a practical meeting. So, we're not going to talk philosophy. What I'm going to say is for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to call tech leads proto-managers, and that's how I treated them. But what I wanted to get to was from a place where we had this lack of clarity about what the role of tech lead was to something where it was clear what the responsibilities for each individual was. So it came up, if you guys are familiar with Blade Runner's coming out next week, by the way. I'm looking forward to that. There you have a test in there. It's called the Voight-Kamp test. And it's to determine whether or not a person's like an android or a human. And I decided to invent the same thing for our managers versus architects. So in this flow chart, you insert your tech lead, and then you ask a few questions, and you get like a manager and architect on the other side. Why is this? What are the questions here, right? I'll just breeze through them real quick and say why. What do you care more about, people or architecture? If you're a manager, I hope your answer is people. What are your thoughts around shipping toward a deadline? I've had many of an IC engineer tell me, I don't need no stinking deadlines. It's ready when it's ready. And if a manager ever tells me that, boy, do I get worried. Your PM goes to 2 of your direct reports and asks them to start working on an urgent new feature. What do you do? All right, so engineering managers, turns out the responsibility for an engineering manager is to manage engineers. It's not that complicated. So if your PM's drop shipping into your team, you got to kind of put a little protection on them. And then finally, you spend 1 day a week trolling LinkedIn or working with recruiting. How does that make you feel? Well, in an organization where you need to hire 100 people, if you tell me you don't like working with recruiting, if you tell me you don't like being rejected on LinkedIn over and over and over again, well, you may not be a great fit for a manager. Now, you can come up with your own test, but this is the test we use at Reddit. It's the test that leads to a management style that I like, and it also reflects what we really needed urgently at the company. But so we ran this. We identified a few people who were going to convert from tech leads to managers. We also got some architects out of this, but that's beyond the scope of the meeting, or this presentation. Next up was, well, what are they supposed to do? All right, so I got all these people who could maybe be managers. They don't know what to do. At Reddit's a startup, and I think many of you in the room at startups, you might agree with this, that at startups, particularly small ones, you've got an issue with roles and responsibilities. And I think like the classic example of this is if you got a brand new startup, you may have the technical co-founder, and you've got the business co-founder. But really, if you look at what those two people are doing, it's pretty much everything. Like you might expect like the CTO to be on like a sales call, for example. But as your company scales up, you need to get more specialized. You start getting like the growth hacker, the marketer. You split engine, product, and design. Like all these specialized roles start to emerge because you need to be a little bit more optimized about it. And now Reddit had this problem in spades. And I'll give you a quick example from our chief legal counsel, Melissa Tidwell. She's one of the smartest people I've ever met. And she told me this story. She said when she first got to Reddit, her first day was the following. She went into that same big room that I showed you a picture of, and it was the Reddit Security Council meeting. And you can imagine Reddit has a lot of issues, talk about legal issues and security and so forth. And who would you imagine would be the members of this like legal advice and security council? Well, of course it was all the line level IC engineers in a room pontificating about legal issues. As if like you could get 10 engineers, cram them together, and then the output would be like a Harvard-educated lawyer. So Missy, shut that down like on day one and took responsibility for legal. But if you don't have a very strong-minded lawyer and you need some way to do this at your startup, here's a thing that I learned about a while back. It's called the RACI chart. So this is a chart where what you do is you try and list out all the different activities in an organization, and then you decide whether or not the people in your organization are responsible, accountable, should be consulted, or informed about those different activities. So the nice thing about this is if you do it, you do get like really, really clear ownership outcomes. It has some disadvantages I'll talk about later. Here's how that ended up for us at Reddit. So the common question was, what does an engineering manager even do? Well, the core problem that we had was we had this role called program manager, and some of you guys might still have that. Particularly at smaller organizations, you may have program managers. But as you get bigger, you may split that role into product managers who are responsible for customer vision and strategy, the who, what, and why. And then engineering managers, people managing engineers who are responsible for architecture and execution. And that was kind of the fundamental thing we needed to pull apart at Reddit. And Racy helped with that somewhat. But it does have disadvantages. Disadvantages are it's very inflexible. So it turns out like some people can switch hit. You do have occasionally a person that can do more than one thing. And now if you do this Racy chart, you lose that flexibility. And then the second thing is it doesn't address like a more fundamental issue, which is lack of trust. And I think that in a healthy organization, maybe you don't spend as much time filling out these funny charts. You just trust people that you hire who have particular titles and backgrounds to do the job that you hired them for. So at Reddit, we did have a little bit of that problem. Even after we went through the exercise of making these Racy charts, we still had to work a little bit on trust. And I'll skip that slide and just go into what we did, tactics for building trust. And I think that, when we talk about trust, the place you want to get to is you want to be able to say, that's not my job, but the person that we hired to do it is amazing. But what do you do to get there, right? At Reddit, we did a few things. I'll talk about 3. The first is pilot teams. So I came in and I had a grand vision of how engineering should run. I had new ideas about processes and workflow, but I know as a new leader into an organization, I cannot just blanket change everything, instantaneously. The best way to build trust is to show an example, a small example, and then build from there. So we actually piloted a lot of the ideas I'm about to show you with a small team, showed good output, and then extended it to the rest of the company. Second thing is the next speaker actually helped us a lot with leadership offsites. So when you're talking about teasing apart roles and responsibilities, it really helps if all the people in the executive team are on board with what those new responsibilities are going to be. So we actually had offsites. We didn't do trust falls like I wrote here, but we did have deep conversations about the role of engineering managers, the role of PM, and then the rest of the roles in the organization, and that helped a lot. And then the final thing that really punches it through is frankly necessity. Because when you talk about things like roles and responsibilities and org charts and da-da-da-da-da, if you're a 30-person team, you don't really see the need for it. You're like, yeah, that sounds all highfalutin. Oh, Nick, he's just from Microsoft, that big, gigantic company with all that process, trying to force it on us. So the way you get around that, you just hire 100 engineers, and then you see what happens. Okay? Yeah, you want to run an engineering org with no org chart and 100 people? Yeah, good luck. All right, so scale pressure and increasing complexity and coordination actually don't necessarily solve it, but it shows the need for this type of role delegation. So that's roughly what we did at Reddit. Oh, my slides didn't come out correct on here. I'll quickly try and memorize the stats that were on this. Here are the results. So Reddit no longer has tech leads or program managers. We've got 10 architects, 10 product managers, and 20 managers. And then half of those managers engineering managers that we have, were promoted from within. And then of those 20, only 2 decided to go back to IC roles. So if you doubted my test that I described earlier on, I have a 90% accuracy success rate. And then the final thing, which is on the bottom of this, is we actually got an org chart out of it. So if you go to Reddit now, we have orgs built around particular investments we want to make with leaders in key places, which is something we didn't have before, but now we feel really, really good about. Okay, so that's how we built up our management team and gave them roles and responsibilities. Turns out that's still not enough. You need process, right? So if you mint a new manager, you still have to give them the tools to execute, and we'll talk about what we did there. So just to talk about what happens when you're trying to scale an organization extremely quickly, there's kind of 3 things that start to get really, really hard. First is awareness. Everyone, as your org gets bigger, wants to know what everyone else is doing. Nobody likes to say what they're doing. Second thing, coordination, and I'll talk about this in more detail in a second, but there's more processes, there's more teams. Everyone does really legitimately need to know what's going on in other areas, because dependencies can cause big problems in your product a bottleneck or a misdependency can essentially cripple your production roadmap. So these are the things you have to deal with. So as a person coming into an org, you might say, well, let me just drop ship a bunch of process on these people and see what happens. But that's not what I'm going to suggest if you ever find yourself in this situation. But first, I'll talk about why you need to do this with a chart that I generated using the power of my MBA. I got to give myself a hard time sometimes. So fundamentally, like, you might think you just add more people to an organization and you just increasing linear output, but in actuality, what happens is the more people you have, the more coordination costs occur. And then you start to see output go down and actually start to decrease unless you make process changes or reorganize your team. So let me just show you what Reddit's processes were when I walked in the door, all right? And this is a real slide. Okay, so this is a Reddit product tracker for one of the teams. And there were 12 of these different product trackers. This product tracker, even though it is perhaps slightly hard to parse and most likely inaccurate, does have some great cartoons on it. And we did spend a lot of the time in our sprint review deciding what sort of cartoons would go onto the slide. But you can see that this is a handcrafted Google slide. So the likelihood that any of those pieces of data are accurate is pretty low. Some of these are coming from JIRA, but I can tell you at the time that we were using these slides, JIRA wasn't uniformly used at the company. So whether or not you would click one of those links and get like actually good data, who knows, right? So this is what I walked into, 12 of these slides, looking at that at a stand-up every day. So I needed to add some process on top of that. Let me just give you some advice and caution about what to do if you find yourself in this situation. First thing is you do want to avoid process junkies if you need to institute process into a new organization. I made a mistake once of believing a little bit too hard in an agile coach for a team for a team that I needed to build up. And the guy came in, he laid out just an insane amount of process on the team, but it turned out that process that he delivered was actually more about coordinating between team members than it was about shipping code. So I'd go to their stand-ups and they'd be talking about WIP limits and they'd be talking about everything other than like, did the customer get the product? And that's the thing I'm actually really passionate about. So you have to be careful, like, don't just dump a lot of process into your team. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that just to hammer the point home. For those of you who are management nerds like me, maybe you know about where the original Kanban ideas came from. There used to be, well, actually there is something called a Toyota production system. And you can read about this. I encourage you to read about it if you care at all about management. They had an idea called Kaizen, and the idea with that was you could be on the production line in Toyota, and if there was a problem, you pulled this thing called the andon cord, and the whole production line would stop, and the managers would emerge down from management heaven and come down to your line, and they'd say, hey, what's going on? And you would talk with the managers and invent processes there so that the error did not repeat. So if you can imagine this cycle repeating, you're going to build only the processes that you need from the bottoms up in a very organic fashion, driven by the people who are actually doing the work. And that's what I like about it. Second thing is, and I'll just leave this slide by saying, the reason I like that idea is because over time, your process becomes your culture. And I like to build organizations that are not overburdened by processes, but that are very, very flexible and adaptable. And I think that using this Kaizen technique leads to that. So let's see what we did at Reddit. Reddit, as I said, didn't have any sort of kind of engineering workflow when I dropped in. So I did come in with something very, very simple, a workflow that I've used on 5 other teams. I won't read this entire slide, but 6 steps if you are going to ship a new feature. Definition, planning, staffing, execution, launch, and monitor. These are the steps I think that most work needs to travel through in order to be done predictably and with quality. So our IT guy explained to me how JIRA works, and took that kind of rough flowchart and converted it into a JIRA workflow. And we gave it to this pilot team to see how things would turn out. And it turned out pretty well, so I can show you where that took us. Now we have a team dashboard. So this is a view of all of the work happening within a particular team. Those numbers represent the number of active stories, if you will, or features that are being delivered. And you can see across this entire part of the organization which are in planning, staffing, execution, or monitoring. And then you can also see at a glance which are blocked, off track, or on track. So this gave Reddit the first kind of all-up view of what was happening at the company. So really, really good. But actually, line-level engineers didn't like it. So it's really good for managers and directors, but didn't quite make it all the way down to the line level. So we modified a little bit. JIRA's got this Kanban board system. You can see the same states going across the top. The difference is now if you're on any one of these teams, you can click in. Here's our conversations team, and you can now see all the major epics just for that team. So now what you'll see is for daily stand-ups, if you work at Reddit, you'll open up the main dashboard, you'll click into your team, and you'll see the Kanban board for your part of the organization. And you can also do some cool stuff with JIRA. I'll just show you real quick. If I only want to know which things are off track, this is useful for me. You can have a couple buttons at the top, off track, so I can see in this media team 3 things are off track. Still not quite good enough. What about reporting upward? Right? What if I need to, instead of having stand-ups, what if I need to be in a director or an exec meeting? So let's look at what we did there. For that, I took JIRA, I added a Tableau extension. I'm a business intelligence guy, so I love charts. And with this, we've got a dashboard that can show directors and above across any part of the organization notes about epics that are in progress, along with a little bit of metrics about how healthy that part of the organization is. And if you look across the top of the screen, this is fun. It's interactive. You can click on the team you want to learn about, and this whole report gets updated on the fly. And then the final thing, because this is still a little bit too much detail, the final thing that we did was executive level dashboards. So I'll show you that. And this is a real-time updated executive level dashboard, and we brought back the cartoons. And now we have complete buy-in from the organization. So I won't go into that any further. This is how we rolled out the process, and these are the tools that we ended up using. And I'll maybe talk through the results after one more topic I want to hit, which is urgency. So even having all those processes in place, we still needed to execute and move quickly. I want to just say a few things about urgency. When I came into Reddit, I noticed that there were many days when there were more engineers in the room with our Nintendo playing Smash Brothers than there were out on the floor writing code. And there's a couple different ways you can react to a situation like that. You can kind of get mad and go to engineers and take the controller out of their hand, but you should also kind of ask yourself, why does an engineer think playing Smash Brothers is more fun than writing code for one of the best websites in the universe? So I asked myself that, and I think that in order to fix it, there's kind of a formula that I'll describe, and it's the urgency formula. I think you get urgency when you do 3 things. You give your ICs a clear mission where they understand what they need to do and how they fit into the overall goal, what they can contribute. Second thing is they need to know how their work is going to impact some customer's life. So one thing we started doing at Reddit was actually brought moderators, content creators into the building to meet with some of our engineers or our product team. And then the final thing is discipline. I think that the best kind of urgency is really just discipline in disguise. So if you saw all those tools that we were using before, using them in a very rigorous fashion will lead you to the appearance of urgency without a bunch of people having to stay late at night, which is what I like. So to summarize all that, I don't think we get urgency from actually asking people to stay late. I think we get urgency from giving people inspiration and mission. And then in terms of dates and when things need to get delivered, I have one other piece of advice I'll give you. That is to say, if you are a top-down kind of person giving your ICs dates to hit, I think you are doing the wrong thing. And the reason I think that is because as an executive manager who's gotten very, very high in the organization, the one thing I can tell you is that all the people who actually know what's going on are right down there on the floor. All right? So if you need dates estimated, you want them coming from the bottom up, from the people who are actually doing the work. And if you allow that to happen, one other really nice thing occurs. you can get those people to commit to the dates that they have given you themselves. So you aren't coming top down, demanding people do things by a particular time. You're asking people, hey, given this mission that we need to hit, and it's urgent, it's important for the company, can you tell me when it will be delivered? And as long as they're setting tough but achievable deadlines, good things will happen. So let's talk about the results, like what happened after we did all this stuff at Reddit. This is a chart of the JIRA epochs that we shipped at Reddit over time by quarter, right? So at Reddit, I think that is like an 8x total increase since I joined the team and instituted this process. You might just say, hey, well, you were hiring a bunch of people too, so you can easily get more output if you hire more people. That's why I circled these first two bars, because we had no extra headcount between Q4 and Q1, and we essentially almost doubled the output of the team simply by improving our processes and communication. And then in terms of what we actually shipped over the year, let's look at that. These are all the major releases that happened at Reddit over the past year. Redid the moderator tooling, launched a new feature called profile pages, did an entire self-service ad platform, international Reddit, new video platform, new search, new chat, which just launched yesterday if you guys want to check it out, and upcoming and in some indeterminate amount of time, which I cannot speak to at this exact moment, a complete site-wide redesign. It does say, man, come on. It's bad, but it's not that bad. So all that's landing in 2017. More output in this essentially three quarters than Reddit has ever seen in the history of the company. So what's next at Reddit? There's three things I'll talk about quickly. First is we got to hire more engineers. So we're up to about 120 now. I think we'll be healthy at around 140, so we're still hiring. Second thing is more product-based. Reddit, just simply put, needs to be more welcoming. Reddit has about 320 million MAU right now, but we imagine what it might be if the site were fresher. If people who landed on the platform could have an enjoyable experience where they could find content that was interesting to them. So making the site more welcoming is a thing that we're really, really cranking hard on. And then the final thing is more personal. So what do I mean by that? Well, pretty much every other social or news platform that you use nowadays, you don't have to manually tune it to tell you what you're interested in. It simply looks at the things that you interact with and discovers your interests over time. Reddit didn't have a data platform up until about 5 months ago. So we're generating 5 terabytes of data per day and not using it to make the experience more personalized for each and every user. So one thing I didn't list in that last slide was we now have an entire team working on search, relevance, and personalization. So with that, calls to action, Reddit's hiring. You can follow me in a bunch of places, and I am doing a thing called Color Code Fund, and there's one other thing I want to mention which is not on the slide for black engineers in the audience. There is a group called DevColor. If you're not in it, please join it. It is the best organization for black software engineers in the Bay Area. Please join it. And with that, thank you so much.